Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here with Philippe J. Fournier for this week's episode of The Numbers, and it's a royal episode because we have the King of Canada, also the King of a bunch of other countries, here in Canada, and he's actually probably within eyesight of where you are. You're in Ottawa.
Yeah. I'm staying at. I'm in Ottawa today, not for the king.
A guest of the king, I imagine.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yes, he looked at my projections and he wants to talk about. No, but it's a kind of a coincidence. I was invited to an event organized by Politico, as you know, Eric. I freelance for Politico. And it's tonight, so I decided to make a little trip out of it. And the king is here. So I saw him enter the Senate. I'm interested in this speech for some, it's not because it's him, but because it's the opening of the session of this parliament. But you know my views on monarchy is like I'm not against it. I just don't care. But I think like many Canadians.
Yeah, and we'll actually get to that because we had a lot of polling on the monarchy over the last week, and since there were so many numbers, we thought we'd delve into those. But we will start talking with some politics. Now, as you just mentioned, the speech from the throne is yet to take place as we're recording. Unlikely that it would have a game-changing event or something that would, and it's not really the kind of stuff we talk about unless the king is dissolving parliament later today. Then we'll re-record.
He doesn't have that power, does he?
Well, he would if Carney asked him, I suppose.
Man.
Maybe Carney he loved campaigning. He wants to take another run at it because he wants to win Terra Nova. The peninsulas. So the vote counting is finally complete.
Yep.
And we had a final flip. So Terra Nova, the peninsulas, Anthony Germain of the Liberals was ahead by 12 votes. And after a judicial recount, Jonathan Rowe of the Conservatives wins by 12 votes.
Yep.
It puts the final count for the Liberals at 169 seats, 144 for the Conservatives, 22 Bloc, 7 NDP, 1 Green. It's a number of flips we've had. We had Terrebonne flip.
Yep.
We had Terra Nova, the Peninsula's flip. There was the judicial recount in Windsor Lakeshore Tecumseh, or Windsor Tecumseh Lakeshore.
It's close.
That reduced it from like 70 something to like 4.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of this. I guess it's just the way the cookie crumbles. But boy, this is an election that kept on going.
Well, it's also they flipped because they were very close, right?
Yeah.
It's when you do a judicial recount, you have observers, you have lawyers, you have a judge, obviously, that goes through all the votes, including those that were discarded on election night. And so it is entirely normal to have a dozen, maybe even 2 or 3 dozens of votes that are reviewed and that are judged good or not good. So we had flips because we had very close races, ones that we hadn't seen in past elections. I mean, I think it's Darren Arnold who tweeted this, that the Liberals in the end were, 63 votes? 63 votes away from a majority. If you look at the closest race, as you said, the ones that you mentioned, plus Nunavut, I think the margin was less than 40 votes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you have close races, it's okay. That's the system working, basically. That's the system saying, okay, we have observers from all parties and lawyers, and we review all the votes. That's fine with me. But the final count, Eric, 169 for the Liberals, 144 for the Conservatives, a gap of 25 seats. Closer than we had anticipated on election night, but still well within range of our projections. The Bloc is challenging the results in Terrebonne. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to flip, but the arguments can be made that there are irregularities. And the NDP stays at 7 and the Greens at 1. That's the final count. 8.6 million votes for the Liberals, 8.1 million votes for the Conservatives.
You mentioned the Bloc challenging the result. At this point, the result would just be thrown out, right? So then we'd have another by-election in that riding, which is probably sick of voting after having a provincial by-election just a couple months ago.
That's right.
It doesn't. We're not going to get into it too much, but it kind of reminds us that an election result, almost like a poll, it's a bit of a snapshot in time because while we have we know who won and lost the election. There is a little fuzziness in terms of the number of votes when you think about it, right? Because you looked at the numbers. I looked at between the validated results and the judicial recount in Terra Nova, the Peninsulas. The number of rejected ballots went up by 200. right? So on election night, and there was 200 votes that were considered good, and then they were thrown out by that judge. So it kind of shows how in an election, once you get down to just a couple votes, it's almost an approximate of what the result was.
Absolutely.
We all agree to it. We all agree that these are the rules. We play by the game of the rules of the game, and that's the results. But it's just a reminder that there's this little fuzziness in terms of what the actual result. You said 8.6 million votes for the Liberals.
Yeah.
Did they get 8.6 or 8,607,000 or 8,608,000? Doesn't really matter, but it's kind of interesting. I find it interesting as like a thought exercise.
Yeah. Oh, there is an uncertainty because there are people who draw flowers on their ballot. There are people who tear their ballots. So it's like it's and when we have such close races, you'll have this variation. But it doesn't bother me that much. Out of how many votes are there? I think there were over 19 millions in total. If we have a dispute over a few hundred votes that were added or subtracted, for me that's not that big a deal. There's always uncertainty in everything. All of science, I know this is not science, but all of science is just approximation of the real world, and the same thing for our elections. So.
Yeah, well, that's what even if Terrebonne voted again, it would be rerunning the election, but in a completely different universe at that point, right?
And the Bloc would win.
Election day. It's not.
And the Bloc would win.
You think? Maybe.
Well, now that voters know that Carney has won, not that they think that he would win. I think many voters in Terrebonne would say, let's give him more and more seats to the Bloc Québécois. It would take only a few families to decide the outcome of this. That's why redoing the election. You say if the Bloc says it's not fair the way it was counted and conducted, but redoing it would also be not fair. There's no perfect answer here. But yeah, so it is what it is. It doesn't bother me that much. Our elections are still very robust.
Yeah, and there's only a handful of ridings that were decided by enough votes that even these judicial recounts would have had any potential to overturn them, and that's why they had those. You look after the next ridings that were decided, that by the smallest margins, we're starting to get into the hundreds and hundreds of votes, right? So, but anyway, just an interesting thing, and this election lasted a lot longer than we thought.
1 month, yeah.
And we're now 1 month, as you said, after it, and we have now some post-election polling. We did want to talk about just this one Abacus data poll that came out since the election. Now, it has voting intention stuff, but honestly, who really cares about that? It has more or less the same result as last time.
Yeah.
But the thing that struck me is that the approval for Mark Carney and the Liberal government, 50%. Disapproval, 24%. It's the highest it's been more or less since the pandemic surge that Justin Trudeau had in the first days of the pandemic. At least at this point, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of buyer's remorse.
Well, no, that's correct. It's still early, and I know a lot of people, especially online, and also some journalists that reached out to me about this poll says, "What's the point of doing such a poll so close to an election?" And while I understand the feelings, like why would you have voting intentions and satisfaction where we're just going to sit in Parliament this week? And my answer is always the same. We need a regular tracking to know when the numbers move. If Abacus's numbers showed wild dissatisfaction against Mr. Carney, it would mean something. It would mean that the mood has soured. But right now, we see the opposite. We see that many Canadians are fine with the results. And the numbers you just stated, Eric, 50% approval, for me, it's the disapproval that's surprising. 24%, that means that, the Conservatives just got 41% of the vote. That means that there's a chunk of Conservative voters who right now are, that's fine. We're okay. We're not happy, but we're not angry either. We'll go along with it and we'll try again next time. Because, of course, there's also a neutral aspect in this question in Abacus's numbers that are not shown. But 50% approval, 24% disapproval. That's a pretty good start for the new government. And we'll see where it goes from there. It's probably going to go down, and always does, but how long will this honeymoon last? Or that I'm curious to see.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you need the tracking. Let's say everybody didn't do any polling for 6 months, and then in 6 months they poll, and suddenly, a party's 20 points ahead or behind. we'd like to know when that happened, right?
Absolutely.
So it's good, useful to have this. It also had some of the personal ratings from Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, so 49% positive impression of Carney, 29% negative. So his numbers are still very good, even after the election. It was a 40-43 split for Poilievre, so still kind of the same numbers. And there's just one finding from it that I thought was interesting. So Abacus had asked, is the Carney government similar or dissimilar from the Trudeau government? And also, is that a good or a bad thing? But I found that it's still remarkable that a lot of voting intentions are still driven by, or at least colored by, opinions of Justin Trudeau, because he had 61% of Liberal voters saying, no, Mark Carney's government's very different from Justin Trudeau's. And then you had 77% of Conservative going, wait, hold on. No, they're actually very similar. So you have Liberals who are voting Liberal saying, this is a different government, and you have Conservatives who don't want to vote Liberal saying, it's the same government. I just think that's interesting because it suggests that those Liberal voters, and a lot of the ones they picked up, probably half of them, would not have voted for the party if it had still been Justin Trudeau.
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt. These numbers show, I mean, just the curves. Go look on the website to see the curves of the government satisfaction completely turning when Carney became PM in mid-March. We had almost record dissatisfaction with the federal government. Then you have this new guy arrives, and the curves just cross path like this. So, I mean, again, we do not know how long it's going to last, but it lasted longer than many thought. How many times, Eric, during the campaign, in all the interviews and the panels that you made, how many times did the examples of John Turner and Kim Campbell come up, right? And those examples came up basically saying that's not going to last. Mm-hmm. But Carney just completely flipped that script and created a precedent for, I think, that will be used in our political analysis throughout the country. I mean, I just heard stories. We talked about the Quebec poll last week. The Quebec Liberals are still a distant second to the Bloc Québécois, to the Parti Québécois, but there's a leadership race. They will have a new leader, and now you never know with a new leader what can happen. You will hear this a lot in the coming years with the precedent that Carney just made.
All right, let's talk about one other last bit of political news, because this was a story that I thought was interesting, and it was David Thurton who wrote it at CBC, and he actually interviewed me for it, so I was especially interested in it. And it was that in the final days of the campaign, the NDP emptied its HQ in Ottawa, gathered up some volunteers, flew them out to Burnaby to help out Jagmeet Singh's riding, do extra door knocking, do that kind of thing, to try to help save the leader. Now, on the one hand, it's not unusual for parties to do this. When you have people in the central HQ in Ottawa, in the last few days of the campaign, you don't need them anymore. They're not doing anything. They're not putting out new ads. They're not really doing new polling. They're not making new messaging. So you send them out to target ridings. But what was interesting about this is that the NDP, and there was people that were sourced in the story, who are a little bit perplexed and maybe a little bit upset that those resources were sent to Jagmeet Singh's riding in Burnaby Central, rather than to other ridings where they could have had a shot to win. What did you make of this?
Well, my first thought was the Conservatives did the same with Pierre Poilievre, right? We heard those stories, the Conservatives sending resources to Carleton to save M. Poilievre, and they were unsuccessful. The problem is, with this narrative, I think we all knew from the numbers how obvious it was that Monsieur Singh was in danger. I mean, I think we started the campaign saying, there's no way he's going to win. We had this discussion, how many leaders are going to lose, and maybe Elizabeth May, but most likely Jagmeet Singh. So if a lot of people circulating around this campaign, and plus you and I, were just certain were they surprised by this? That's baffling for me. And also, that means that Monsieur Singh really wanted to stay as leader. Like he basically, this tells me that he intended, had he won his seat, to stay as leader, or to at least to try to stay as leader. I had just figured that, after surely this is his last election. If he loses his riding, that means the voters will have resigned him for himself. But yeah, it was strange, and I can understand some frustrated NDPers, especially after such a poor result. would start asking questions about the party's strategy. What did you make of it, Eric?
Well, you mentioned Poilievre, right? That came as a surprise that it ended up flipping, right?
Yep.
We almost didn't believe those stories when we saw them.
Yep.
And in the end, it was a pretty close result. I think he ended up losing by, I don't know, 5 points, something like that.
It was, 5 points.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's the kind of seat that, okay, you should have put resources in to try to hold. If it was any other seat, even if it wasn't the leaders, you would still say, you should try to put some resources to hold this seat. But it was the fact that they still thought that, one, Burnaby Central could be saved in some way, and two, that you wanted to try. I find that's just what it was so perplexing to me, is that, okay, Singh finished, I looked it up, he finished 24 points behind the Liberals in third place. 24 points.
I know, right?
A few extra door knocking would not have saved that seat. It wasn't a close seat. And if you rank all of the seats by how well the NDP did, this was 25th.
Wow.
This was not even in the top 15 or so that would have delivered a official party status for the NDP. So you can line up a dozen seats, literally a dozen seats or more, where those resources would have been better served saving the NDP's official party status, which to me should have been the goal by the end of the campaign. Either way, if Singh had won his seat, then it would have been one of those 12, so maybe he couldn't have resigned. Yeah. But it tells me that we were getting a lot of pushback during the campaign from New Democrats that, our incumbents are going to survive. Oh, yeah, these numbers,
Look at the Ontario NDP. Look at what they did.
Look at the Ontario NDP.
Yeah.
It makes me think that they might have believed this a little bit too much. Yeah. That they thought that their MPs, Matthew Green, Brian Massey, Matheson in London, Nikki Ashton, some of the other ones, Taylor Bacharach, that they were safe. Peter Julian. That he was safe. Now I'm sure they also put some resources into those ridings, but
Peter Julian was close.
A lot closer than Singh.
Pulling the numbers here, Peter Julian had just under 32% of the vote, and the Liberal won with 35%. And Jagmeet Singh, as you said, 24 points is huge, but when you look at the raw numbers, it's even worse. The Wade Cheng, the new Liberal MP that won Burnaby Central, just under 22,000 votes. Jagmeet Singh had 9,300 votes. It's not even close. So to think that you pour more door knockers and more people to work the phones, and that would have helped you gain 13,000 more votes, to more than double what Jagmeet Singh already had. Just poor resource management. But I guess you work with the data you have, not the data you wish you had. Perhaps they had bad data or no data. That perhaps they just went with the Ontario narrative that we're going to be fine because we're people like our MPs.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if we have any sort of post-mortems for the NDP, because you can look at what happened in the Liberal campaign, what happened in the Conservative campaign seems obvious enough, right? That the Conservatives took time to pivot, that there was some reluctance to do that. For the Liberals, it's that they had a message that they kind of got knocked off and kind of didn't stay focused on it. But what was going on with the NDP, I'd like to know. Whether there was what was happening within that campaign, what they knew, what resources they had, which I think is what you said. What numbers did they have? That'll be interesting to see, and we'll get it at some point. We'll get some indication of how much the party spent on these campaigns and what they spent it on. But what happened with the NDP in those final weeks to me is an interesting subplot in that election.
The numbers fluctuated much during the past month with the recounts and the validation, but in the end, the Bloc Québécois got more votes than the NDP.
Yeah, that's incredible.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Charles III. I found his official title in Canada. Charles III, by the grace of God, King of Canada and his other realms and territories, head of the Commonwealth, is in Ottawa. He was in Ottawa. He arrived on Monday, and he was here on Tuesday to read the speech from the throne. Philippe is probably sequestered in the hotel just to make sure that he doesn't try to cause any trouble. Bad day to head to downtown Ottawa if you had any intentions of getting around anywhere. do Canadians still want to have the king, want to have the monarchy? We've got a lot of polls out over the last little while. What are your initial thoughts before we delve into some of these numbers?
Well, a lot of polls on the issue, and of course, not every poll uses the same wording for the questions, which matters a lot, and we know it matters a lot. It's not that they're biased or they're crooked or anything. It's just that there are many ways to approach this. For instance, I mean, you ask the average voter, do you want Canada to still be a constitutional monarchy? Not to insult anybody, but I think a lot of voters answering this question would be, wait, what? We're a constitutional monarchy? Or what does it mean? Or I even had a comment on my piece about the poll today saying, why would we uphold all our constitutional reforms and traditions for something that is just a symbolic head of state? Like, if the king or the royal family tried to really intervene with Canada's affairs, I think there would be an uproar. But since they're just symbolic, we don't care. And I think from these numbers, we see a lot of people saying, yeah, it would be nice not to have the monarchy anymore, but in the end, it would be a lot of work. And I don't think Canadians would agree on what to replace it with.
That's
did you have... Yeah. Did you have something specific? I had a few things that I noticed from these polls, but why don't you go first? What did you read in the numbers, Eddie?
All right. Well, there are 4 polls that I found over the last week. There's one by Polera, there's one by Ipsos, there's one by the Angus Reid Institute, and there's one by Léger that was done in Quebec only.
Yeah.
There's a couple of common threads here. There's a huge difference between Quebec and the rest of Canada. The rest of Canada is kind of split. Usually a little bit more favorable, or it's a bit more of a toss up in the rest of Canada. In Quebec, it's not a toss up at all.
Oh no,
Quebecers, especially Francophone Quebecers, do not see themselves in the British monarchy, even if it is the Canadian monarchy as well.
Yeah. Sorry.
And is the king calling?
That's right. He's giving a speech and just asked me, hey, stop talking about me. Sorry about that. That's impolite.
No, that's fine. But anyway, yes. So there's a couple of things also from these polls that I thought was interesting. One of them is that it does, as you mentioned, depend on how you ask the question. So we got a question from Polera, and you found that in the Polera poll, 45% of Canadians said that Canada should remain a constitutional monarchy. 39% said no. All right. That's
close.
+6 for the Royalists. Then you have this other question from Ipsos, and it says Canada should end its formal ties to the monarchy. 46% agree. All right, that's losing. There's 54% who disagree that we should keep our ties. But Ipsos also had a question, and 59% agreed that King and the royal family should not have any formal role in Canadian society. There you got 59% who agreed with that. And then you had the Angus Reid Institute that had the basic question, Canada should continue as a constitutional monarchy for generations to come, which I find is an odd wording, but they say for generations to come. 30% yes, 46% no. It all depends on how you ask the question.
Yeah. It all depends on how you ask your questions, but also when you say any formal role, the role is very formal. But as perhaps I hear that and I see, okay, well, a formal role means an important role, like an active role. But it's not an active role. It's very formal, but it's not active, right? So I understand these polls are really interesting taking together, especially because they diverge on these things. And the one you mentioned with the Angus Reid Institute, I think from the same question, the breakdown by partisan line really is the one that struck me. So, okay, do you think Canada should continue as a constitutional monarchy for generations to come? As you said, 46% no, 30% yes. Partisan breakdown. Among Liberals, 35% say no, 39% say yes. So it's basically split. It's a statistical tie. Among Conservative voters, 52% say no. We should get rid of the monarchy. So I thought for the longest time, and during my childhood, the Mulroney years, the progressive conservatives, that the monarchists in this country were the Tories. They were the conservatives. And I think it was still the case with Stephen Harper.
It was very much. He put the Royal Canadian Air Force, Royal Canadian Navy back. It used to, for a while, it was just, the Armed Forces, Canadian Navy. It had been removed. That got added back to it. So he took steps to try to reestablish those kinds of links with the royal family. So yes, very much the Conservatives were pro-monarchy under Stephen Harper.
And so for me, this is what's most interesting. It's when you look at the same question and you look at the partisan breakdown, because the generational breakdown is not that interesting. I looked it up. Even the regional breakdown, yes, Quebec is mostly opposed, which is interesting because the next most opposed is Alberta, which, again, a very conservative province. But so I don't want to go too much into this because this is maybe the works of academics. It may be something much deeper, but perhaps the conservative movement in Quebec is itself, in Canada, is itself split. There are Tories and there are Republicans, not in the Donald Trump term, but in the Americans term. This will be, I think, something that could be changing the landscape in the coming years, because if conservatives are not monarchists in the future, I see little future for the monarchy in Canada, even though we know it will be complicated to do anything about it.
Yeah, I think that's that's again the reason why I think nothing will ever happen, or at least not in our short term, because it would be very complicated. And what the Angus Reid Institute had a question related to indifference, right? It was 83% said they were indifferent that to the monarchy or to the king's presence. I can't recall which question it was, but that to me has always been the hallmark of Canadians' views of the monarchy. General. Again, it depends on the time. It does seem like there has been a bit of a bump in support for the monarchy over the last little while. Like if you look at the Ipsos poll, the numbers are all up, like in terms of good for the monarchy, since April 2023. So I think there has been a bit of a shift, and maybe Donald Trump has helped do that, sort of highlighting the differences Canada has from the United States. Ties to the monarchy would be one of them. But yeah, we see that there is this change in maybe the views of it among Canadians. If the Conservatives are becoming more less traditional, less institutional, that's an interesting development, especially if the royal family and the monarchy is seen as much more of an older style thing, maybe a Central Canadian, Eastern Canadian thing, less of a Western Canadian thing. You could see that could become something that has an impact on how the Conservatives move forward with this issue in the future. I remember when Pierre Poilievre won the leadership. Oh. Were you there? I think you were there.
Well, the Queen had just died. We saw each other that night. The Queen had just died, and they sang "God Save the King." And I remember saying,
funeral.
Really?
It was like a funeral, that leadership event.
Yeah.
Because the Queen had just died. They were playing music that you would hear going into a funeral in a church. It wasn't Down with Webster with Mark Carney there. It was somber.
Yeah. That's 3 years ago. That's 3 years ago.
And it doesn't seem like, at least for the party's core supporters, that it is as big of an issue or as big of a deal to them as it might have been not too long ago. That seems to be an interesting development. I don't know what it means for the future, though.
What is your overall impression of King Charles? Favorable, unfavorable, no opinion? Among Canadians, 43% unfavorable, 29% favorable. So that's a minus 14. Okay. Among Liberals, it's even. Among Conservatives, 48% unfavorable, 28% favorable. That's a minus 20. So a minus 20 favorable rating among Conservatives in Canada. There's something happening. This is not normal. I mean, I read some people saying this is the proof of deeply polarized partisan lines. If it was Pierre Poilievre, the prime minister, inviting the king, perhaps the numbers will move a little bit. And you know what? That's fair. That happens to all sides of the spectrum. But this seems significant that the Conservatives are souring on the monarchy and other institutions. But to be continued.
Yeah, and that debate, again, is very different based on Quebec versus Canada. Léger had a poll on Quebec only, and it said if it was put to a referendum, 52% of Quebecers would vote to end the monarchy, only 21% would vote to keep it.
Yeah.
So that's more than a 2-to-1 against. And it was actually said, get rid of the monarchy, become a republic.
Yeah.
Which I think is also, when you have that question, like, should Canada remain a constitutional monarchy? It, in a way, almost can apply. We should become a authoritarian monarchy or a like it does raise the question of, like, what would the alternative be? And is that alternative even like a democratic one? But it is an interesting debate. Angus Reid Institute on Canada should continue as constitutional monarchy. They were the only ones who had a good breakdown between kind of Quebec and the rest of Canada in the French versus English, because they had that breakdown in their crosstabs. Among Anglophones, it was 35% remain, 41% not remain a constitutional monarchy or get rid of it.
Really?
But among Francophones, it was 11 to 64. 64 against and 11 for. So that is still a divide within the country. But the biggest divide might be between caring and not caring, which I think is probably the...
Hey, we could do a special episode. Who should be on our money if not for the monarchy? We'll talk about this later. We'll
see how Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers do.
That's right.
One last thing to chat about before we get to, I believe you have a quiz. There was a poll from Léger on Canadians' views of sovereignty for their own province.
Yep.
It found a surprising amount of support for sovereignty for people's provinces across the country.
Everywhere.
Yeah. Which makes me wonder if people thought of it less in the independent sense that would be in Quebec, but more of the, like, more powers for the province.
Yeah.
But the two that probably, are worth looking at the most was Quebec, 33 was for, 59 against. But Alberta was 41 for sovereignty, 44 against. And that caught a lot of people's attention because that's pretty much a toss-up.
It's pretty much a toss-up, but it was also a graded curve, right? It was very favorable, somewhat favorable. So that's interesting too. You see that the very unfavorable was the highest, had a plurality. But so we'll have to track this over the coming years, especially if there is a referendum. Danielle Smith talked about it. She did not reject the idea of sovereignty for Alberta. So this one has a statistical tie, whereas just last week we had a large sample, Léger poll of Alberta only, that showed, I believe it was 29% of respondents were in favor of sovereignty. Big difference. It could be the way it was worded. It also could be a very small sample. I believe this sample in this poll had 133 respondents from Alberta. With a random sample, that's a margin of error plus or minus 8. So this is really big. But I think this is a warning sign to all pollsters. And we know pollsters have had difficulty polling Alberta in recent decades. That we should poll this regularly to see if there are trends. Once or twice a year will not be enough. We need a regular tracking, monthly tracking of multiple pollsters to see really what's going on. Because this one, I raise my eyebrows too at this. Unless there's been big change of moods in Alberta in the past 10 days, which is doubtful. But could be the case.
I do think that the caveat with the sample size is pretty important. If we had seen a voting intentions poll out of Alberta, which we did see sometimes, that had the Conservatives and the Liberals more or less tied, we wouldn't say, like, whoa, this is a new development, have an actual news story written on it and all this kind of stuff. We would look at it like, okay, yeah, all right, once in a while this will happen, probably not a real thing. So, again, not to dismiss the result in and of itself, I do think that we are seeing more and more indications that support for sovereignty, or at least an openness to the idea, is pretty high in Alberta.
Yeah.
But is it actually within 3 points? Probably not. I would say that that sample size probably matters quite a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I think you have a quiz.
All right. What is this stone? Don't you like my quizzes? You crushed it. I mean, maybe you wanted the last quiz to be the last quiz, right?
You warned me about it.
All right. Okay. So I gave you a false indication.
Oh.
I just asked you if you knew your royals. And then I realized that it bores the hell out of me, and I don't want to give you a quiz about royal family because I just can't do it. I
did all my research on Ethelred.
Well, there you. I thought research was cheating.
I didn't do any research. Okay. Of course not.
All right. So it's a format we used before, but it's still a fun one. So, okay, I will. It's a quiz about the 2025 federal election. Once again,
it's not about the king? Okay.
no, it's not about the king. Who cares? I will give you 3 winners, and for 1 point, you have to tell me among these 3 winners who had the highest share of the vote.
Okay.
If you do get the right answer, you can get another point by giving me who finished second and third among the 3 that I give you. So these are all winners. Now, Of course, there is a little twist, but it's in your favor. In past instances of this quiz, if a candidate had 60.1% and another one had 60.2%, it's like, aha, this one has. So at least I made it sure that all these candidates had at least 2 points separating them. So that there is a real difference between these, because otherwise it's just guesswork.
Okay.
So we're going to go from west to east. I have 10 of these, so potential for 20 points. I will, since the second point is conditional on you getting the first one, I will put gold at 12, which I think would be fair. Okay. So gold is 12, silver is 10, bronze is 8, and below 8, as you know, my friend, is shame.
Shame.
So, okay, we're going to start. Are you ready, my friend?
Go ahead.
We are starting in British Columbia. Eric, who among these 3 winners had the highest share of the vote? Was it Todd Doherty, the Conservative in Caribou Prince George? Was it Bob Zimmer, the Conservative, in Prince George Peace River, Northern Rockies? Or was it Frank Caputo, also a Conservative, in Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola?
Okay, I recently looked at this, so I know that it was. I think it was one of the Prince George ones. I think it was Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, whatever.
Northern Rockies.
I think that was the one with the highest vote share for the Conservatives.
Bob Zimmer had 71% of the vote and is the highest of the 3. So, Congrats, you get the point. Now, is who finished second and who finished third? So I'll just repeat: Caribou Prince George, Todd Doherty, and Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola, Frank Caputo.
I think it would be Caribou Prince George.
The second.
Yeah.
Okay, and you get 2 points.
Yes.
Todd Doherty and Caribou Prince George had 60%, and Frank Caputo had 51.5%. So you have a perfect 2 points for this round.
Wow.
Pretty good.
All right.
All right. We are going into rural Alberta. Just a slate of Conservatives again.
Yeah.
Okay. Burton Bailey, the Conservatives in Red Deer. William Stevenson, the Conservatives in Yellowhead. Or Arnold Viersen, the Conservatives in Peace River, Westlock. So at least these 3 had all at least 2 points between them. Who had the highest share of the vote? Red Deer, Yellowhead, or Peace River, Westlock?
I'm going to say it was Peace River, Westlock. That is usually pretty safe for the Conservatives, so I'm guessing that they did the best there.
Mr. Viersen in Peace River, Westlock had 77% of the vote and is the highest among these 3. You get the point. All right. Who finished second and third?
So
Red Deer or Yellowhead?
The Liberals did a little bit better in parts of Alberta, like, in Lethbridge. And Red Deer being a city, maybe they would have done a little bit better than Yellowhead. I'll say that second place went to Yellowhead.
And you are wrong, my friend.
Oh.
Burton Bailey in Red Deer had 71.6% of the vote in Red Deer. Quite impressive. And William Stevenson had 69% of the vote in Yellowhead. So you get 1 point. You're at 3. That's still pretty good.
I'll take it.
Okay, and you got all the winners. We are going into Calgary. Again, 3 Conservatives. Michelle Rempel Garner in Calgary Nose Hill. Stephanie Cousy in Calgary Midnapore. And Amanpreet Gill in Calgary Skyview. Who had the highest in these 3?
The Liberals were a little bit competitive in Skyview, but not nearly as much as we thought they would be. So I'm going to say that that was the third one. So it's between the other two. Nose Hill or Midnapore. I'm going to say that it was Calgary Midnapore that was first and Calgary Nose Hill second.
Wow. That is exactly correct.
Oh, phew.
Stephanie Cousy in Midnapore had 65.5% of the vote. Michelle Rempel-Garner, again on the front bench of the Conservatives, 59%. And you were correct, Mr. Gill in Calgary Skyview had 55. That's still really high.
Still really high. 55. That was a seat we thought the Liberals could actually win.
Absolutely. Not even close, huh? All right. So you get 2 points. You have 5 out of 6. Okay, you're in good shape. We are going into the prairies, so I combined Saskatchewan and Manitoba here. Okay. And we have our first Liberal. Buckley Bélanger, the Liberal, the only Liberal in Saskatchewan and Desnete, Missinippi, Churchill River. Brandon Leslie, the Conservative in Portage Lisgar in Manitoba. Or Kevin Lamoureux, the Liberal in Winnipeg North. Among these three, who had the highest share of the vote?
I know that out of the Liberals, Bélanger would be ahead of Lamoureux. But would Bélanger be ahead of Portage Lisgar? So Portage Lisgar, the PPC had done really well there before, but their vote absolutely tanked.
Not this time.
Did they get over? Just to speed things along, I'll try to get them. I'll try to do them all at once. I think it'll be Portage Lisgar first, Desnethe, Missinippi, Churchill River second, and then Winnipeg North third.
So Brandon Leslie in Portage Lisgar had 69% of the vote.
Okay.
Buckley Bélanger in Desnethe, Missinippi, Churchill River had 65% of the vote.
Good.
And so you are correct because Kevin Lamoureux had 58% of the vote. So you get the 2 points. Oh my God. I would fail this quiz. There's no way I would pass this quiz. Okay, so you have 7 points out of 8.
Doing well. I'm almost out of shame.
Very well. We're going into Northern Ontario. Eric Melilot, the Conservative, in Kenora, Kiiwetinoong. Viviane Lapointe, the Liberal, in Sudbury. Or Patty Hiju, the Liberal, in Thunder Bay, Superior North.
I think Sudbury was pretty competitive. I remember it was supposed to be competitive, so I think that it was pretty competitive. So I'm going to say that wasn't it. I think it would be Eric Melilot in Kenora, Kiiwetinoong, and then Patty Hiju in Thunder Bay. Is it Superior North or
Superior
Rainy
North.
River?
Superior North.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to go with.
Patty Hiju in Thunder Bay, Superior North had 55% of the vote, the highest of the three. So then it was Eric Melilot. Then it was Viviane Lapointe in Sudbury. She had 52% of the vote.
Really?
And then Eric Melilot in Kenora, Kiiwetinoong had 49%.
Oh, boy.
Of the vote.
Okay, well, I would have gotten that wrong anyway because I would have said Sudbury would have been third. Wow. Okay.
Sudbury was surprising. This is the strongest. Okay. Okay, we're going into the GTA. Michael Gugleimin, the Conservatives in Vaughan Woodbridge, or as I used to say, Vaughan Woodbridge. Helena Hajek, the Liberal in Markham
Stouffville.
I want to say Stouffville, sorry. Or Jacob Mantle, the Conservatives in York, Durham.
Ooh.
So Vaughan Woodbridge, Markham Stouffville, York, Durham. Who had the highest?
I'm pretty sure in Vaughan Woodbridge, the Conservatives did really well. It had like 66 or 67 or something. Yeah, okay. This one I'm less sure of, so I'm just going to say who I think finished first. I'm going to say it was Vaughan Woodbridge, Conservatives.
Michael Gudlielmin had 60% of the vote in Vaughan Woodbridge and was the highest.
Okay.
So good for you, get a point.
Out of the remaining two, I think probably the Conservatives in York, Durham.
And you are correct, 56% of the vote, and Madame Hajek, 51% of the votes. So you get the full 2 points.
Up to 10? No,
you
I'm
are up to 9. 9 out of 10. So you have bronze locked up.
Oof.
Okay, you're doing way better than I thought. This is impressive. Okay, we're going into Toronto, the 416. Leslie Church in Toronto St. Paul's. They're all 3 Liberals, of course. Nate Erskine Smith in Beaches, East York. Or Evan Solomon in Toronto Centre.
Oh, man. These are probably almost all like contiguous ridings, too.
I think so, yeah. Absolutely. So there's at least 2% between each of them.
Yeah.
Who had the highest of the 3?
I think it was Beaches, East York. I think Nate Erskine Smith had like one of the better results for the Liberals in the country. So I'm going to say he was first.
He had 67.7 of the vote. He's the first among the 3. That's right. You get the point.
Oh, out of the other 2, honestly, I have no idea. I'm going to guess it was Evan Solomon, Toronto Centre.
And you are correct. 64%. And Leslie Church had 62%. Interestingly,
Incredible.
Leslie Church, you remember we did that by-election. It was the night of the Game 7 of the Oilers and the Panthers last year. And I think she had 41%, right?
It's incredible how much, and we saw the same thing happen in La Salle Verdun.
Yep.
The by-elections back last year, as if they never happened. Didn't matter.
Absolutely. So you get 2 points, and now you have 11.
Okay.
Did I say gold was 12?
Yeah.
I mean, I said 14, I think.
No, you said 12. You said 12.
We are going to Quebec, dans les Laurentides, in the Laurentians. Réal Fortin, of the Bloc québécois, in Rivière-du-Nord. Tim Watchhorn, the Liberal, surprise Liberal winner in Les Pays d'en Haut. Or Madeleine Chenette, the Liberal, in Thérèse de Blainville. These are 3 ridings that we mention occasionally during the campaign, especially the last 2. Who had the highest share of the vote?
Oh, this is good, and I'm not sure. So I'm just going to say, Liberals did pretty well in Thérèse de Blainville because it was supposed to be a target seat, and they won it. Pays d'en Haut was a bit of a surprise, so I'm guessing they didn't do that well. So I'm going to guess it was Réal Fortin in Rivière-du-Nord who finished the highest.
Réal Fortin had 43.8% of the vote.
That's probably not
2 points behind Madeleine Chenette and Thérèse de Bienville with 46%. And Tim Watchhorn was third with 41%. The Liberals did really well in the Laurentians. They did not win that many seats. They won, they didn't win the lower Laurentians. But they did well, surprisingly, everywhere. So,
All right.
Okay. You're stuck at 11, still short of gold. We have 2 left. Okay, this could be close. We are going into Montreal. And this was not easy because, I'll tell you after. Okay. Alexandre Boulris, the New Democrat, I think the first New Democrat that I name here, in Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie, my home riding. Marie-Gabrielle Ménard, the Liberal, in Hochelaga-Rosemont-Est. And right next door, Mario Beaulieu, the Bloquiste, in La Pointe-de-l'Île. Again, 3 contiguous ridings. Who had the highest?
I think Boulris had something like 43. Beaulieu, it was close-ish, but I'm guessing he was a little bit lower. So I'm guessing Hochelaga wasn't that close. So I'm going to say Hochelaga-Rosemont-Est was the top one. And then I'll say, just to get it out of the way,
okay.
Second, I'm going to say it was Boulris.
So Marie-Gabrielle Ménard, the Liberal in Hochelaga-Rosemont-Est, had 46% of the vote and was the highest.
Okay. I got gold.
You got gold, my friend, barely. Mario Beaulieu had 43% and Alexandre Boulris had 41%.
Oh,
so you don't get the second point. Only 41% for Boulris, huh?
And that was the third best the NDP did in the country. So,
yeah, well.
It was a rough election.
Okay, so you got gold.
All
You want to
right.
have super gold. We're going into Atlantic Canada. David Miles, the Liberal, in Fredericton, Oromocto. Clifford Small, the Conservative, in Central Newfoundland. Or Sean Fraser, the Liberal, in Central Nova. Who had the highest?
The Liberals did super well in Fredericton Oromocto, really surprisingly well. So I think Miles was probably first, and Fraser nearly lost. So I'm guessing that he's not that close. Clifford Small did seem to get a bit of an incumbent bonus. So I'm going to say it was Miles, then Small, then Fraser.
David Miles in Fredericton Oromocto, 61% of the vote, which is, as you said, really high. So he was the highest. So you got this one. Clifford Small had 54% of the vote in central Newfoundland and was second. And so you get the point. Sean Fraser, you say he almost lost. Well, the thing is, this is skewed by the fact that
he almost lost that night.
He had 52% of the vote.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
But you're correct that early in the night with the count, Central Nova was blue, and it was blue for a long time. And then we turned our attention to the rest of the country, and it flipped. And it wasn't that close in the end. But so you get 2 points there. So how many is that? Is that 14 points?
14.
14 points. That's pretty good.
Your line was pretty good.
Very interesting. So you get... I mean, thing is, we have many new viewers and listeners to this podcast. Mm-hmm. I don't think they saw you miss...
I've had some bad quizzes.
You had some bad quizzes, but not lately. So maybe I'm going to tighten the screws a little bit next time. But congratulations, Eric. Very well.
All right. Thank you. All right, number of the week. I'm going to do mine because you've already kind of scooped mine because you mentioned it earlier. But my number is 57.
Okay.
So this was the margin of defeat for the Liberals in the 3 ridings that would have given them a majority in Terra Nova, Nunavut, and Windsor Lakeshore, or Windsor Tecumseh Lakeshore. It was what was it? 12 votes in Terra Nova. It was 4 in Windsor, and it was 41 in Nunavut. So 57 is what meant the difference between winning and losing, and you would need one more vote in each of those. So they were 60 votes short of a majority government. Just kind of shows how close it was. I ran the numbers. The Conservatives were about 12,000-ish votes short of winning the most seats.
Yeah.
Again, that's not a lot of votes out of, what did you say, 19 million?
It was just under 20 million. Yeah.
It just shows how close these elections actually can be and how every vote does matter. Very good, Eric.
My number of the week is 80%. A number that kind of floored me again, and that will... a theme that will come up in the next year running up to the Quebec election. So to what extent do you feel attached to your country, to your province, and to your city? In Quebec, this is léger. To your country, 80%. To your province, 80%. Man.
Is it Quebec's the same 80%, do you think?
The same 80%. Yeah. No, so Quebec is full of contradictions. Interestingly, Alberta was 70% country, 73% province, so about the same. But that 80% figure, it has to give some headaches to the Parti québécois and pas simplement Plamondon because the narrative has changed in the past few months, and I'm looking forward to see whether they will adjust. And I'm not sure how they can. They're still leading in the polls. The PQ is. But that idea of having a referendum early in the first mandate will have to be revisited, I think. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, well, that'll be it for this week's episode of The Numbers. We will have a subscribers-only, members-only episode later this week. We'll probably end up doing a mailbag episode, so if you're a Patreon member, we'll put out a call for questions soon. But so if you want to listen to that, you want to get access to the Discord, get ad-free audio episodes, you can join us at thenumberspod.ca to join the Patreon. We've also turned on subscriptions in Apple, so if you do want to have just your bonus episodes in your Apple podcast platform, you can join us just there. But if you want to get the Discord and everything else, you can join us at the Patreon. So Philippe, thanks very much again this week. Enjoy the presence of the king, the glow, the feeling of being so close to an anointed one. And we'll talk later on this week.
Absolutely. Take care, Eric. Merci beaucoup, Eric. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. Have a great week.